بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم فقد نوينا التعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير ونفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It is a blessing to be here with all of you, to see the many familiar faces, but also the great and beautiful new faces as well. And welcome to everyone. I hope that you're all settling in inwardly and outwardly, and that you're all finding comfort inwardly and outwardly, inshaAllah ta'ala. May Allah give us great intentions, and may Allah raise us in those intentions and allow us to come out of this with above and beyond what we hoped for, inshaAllah ta'ala. Today I have been tasked with a monumentous task to discuss that which took thousands of years of scholarship, that which took centuries and centuries of burning the midnight oil, that which took the greatest minds of our ummah hundreds and hundreds of years to get down. I have 1 hour to discuss it. Alhamdulillah, what a good problem to have, alhamdulillah. And one of the amazing things that we don't realize is how great our tradition is, and one of the aspects of Islamic scholarship that really shines forth as an example of this great treasure trove, this great tradition that we have, is the chapters on Islamic finance, the chapters on transactions and the laws with regards to finances, because one of the greatest examples of a codices of law for the Muslims, but for the world really, is the Majallat Ahkam al-Adaliyah. There's a book called the Majallat Ahkam al-Adaliyah, which was the Ottoman code of law for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was made by the Muslims, alhamdulillah. And it was a committee of some of the greatest scholars of the time. And this is going back about 500 years at least. Some of the greatest scholars of that time, including the son of Ibn Abidin. For the Hanafi scholars, he is the last of that top-tier scholarship of the earlier generations. His son, Alauddin Abidin, was on that committee, and this became the Ottoman code of law for hundreds and hundreds of years. And much of our current civil law, as well as the civil law of many other countries, is deeply inspired by that book, right? By that work and the commentaries on it. So this is it is an honor to be able to discuss such a very deep and important issue. And I'll just start with a very short story. In the time of just after Imam Abu Hanifa alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, so this is around the same time as Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, Imam Malik, and so forth, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Many of the people, because Islam was spreading to many different lands, you can say the financial status of many of the Muslims was on the rise. Many people who were originally very poor are now becoming quite well off. And in this time, some of the scholars were afraid that the Muslims were becoming kind of enamored with comforts and enamored with material things. So they cut themselves off from material excesses, and they implemented a quality that is beloved to our tradition called zuhud, which is detachment from worldly things, detachment from things that have no meaning in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a lot of them would wear like really thick wool, itchy clothing, right, and just leave all the comforts of the world. And that was kind of the path of their spirituality at that time. And that's why whenever you hear about, for instance, spirituality in the very earlier generations, they didn't call it tasawwuf or tazkiyah, they called it zuhud. That was the sign that you were a person on the spiritual path, that you had zuhud. So some of the the people came to Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, the teacher of Imam al-Shafi'i, radiallahu anhum, and said, why don't you write a book on zuhud? Why don't you write a book on zuhud? Meaning essentially asking him, why don't you write a book on spirituality? Why don't you write a book on the inward realities of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he said, I wrote a book on business transactions. That's sufficient. Meaning what he was trying to say is, having wealth is not a problem. Right? And he saw that as not itself, in and of itself, a bad sign. But the point was that if you had that wealth, you transacted in a way that was pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you were just as much on the spiritual path as anyone else. Right? But so and this is fortified by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, La batsa bil ghina liman ittaqa Allah azza wa jal. There's nothing wrong with wealth for the one who has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So, and this is a really important mindset to have, because a lot of times we equate wealth with dunya. Right? And in reality, the word dunya in the Quran has a bad connotation. Right? But Allah talks about wealth in the Quran by using the word khayr. وَإِنَّهُمْ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. Khayr means good. Indeed, they are ever in love with khayr, with wealth. Right? So it's not wealth in and of itself is not good or bad. Right? It depends on what one uses it for, whether that becomes distracting to them in their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it's a means of them even drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So wealth in the hands of a person with taqwa is a great thing, because they can benefit the ummah greatly with it. And yesterday we took a trip to Manhattan. We saw a very beautiful example of that. A person of wealth doing everything he can to support the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to understand kind of the mindset behind Islam's view on wealth and finance, it really opens the doors for our practice, as well as how we understand each other in this society. So just to frame, how does Islam's stance on finance itself? So there were, in the earlier days, you can see like a lot of the philosophers went into this, and many of the early historians as well, that there was a few extremes in how we dealt with wealth. Right? There was one society that was very individualistic. Like, it's my money, I can do whatever I want with it. I don't have to do anything for anyone. Right? And that's the kind of mindset that informed that time. And then there was a reaction to that, which was just as extreme. It said, no one has private ownership. Everyone shares wealth. Right? And that was communism. Whereas Islam is settled right in the middle. Ummatan wasata. We are the middle nation. We are a nation of moderation. That Islam affirms private ownership, for sure. Right? A person has their own wealth. It's not shared with anyone else. They own it. But they do have communal obligations. They do have religious and communal obligations as well. So we can see that coming forth in regards to zakat. For instance, zakat is the minimum obligation communally on anyone who has a sufficient amount of wealth that fulfills the conditions. Right? So if someone said, no, it's my money, I don't have to give zakat, right? That is a major sin. Right? And if they said, I don't believe it's obligatory to give zakat, then that's tantamount to disbelief. Right? And we can see that at the time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, there were many people who took that road and said, no, I'm not giving anything. Right? And he, because of the fragility of the time, being that the Prophet ﷺ just passed, he sent out armies, right, because of that. And he said that if they do not give me even the hobble of a camel that they would normally have given to the Prophet ﷺ, then I would fight them against it. Right? And the other companions, they originally disagreed, but they saw that this was the right way to go. Right? So there is an obligation to others in regards to wealth, the very minimum being zakat. The very minimum being zakat. Right, so Islam affirms private ownership as well as communal obligations. Now, in regards to transactions, right, people have been transacting since the very beginning. Right? Bartering was the first way. Like, you had a clay pot, right, and I have a sheep, but I don't have anything to gather water in, and you don't have anything to milk. Right? So let's trade. Right? This has been going since time immemorial. But so Islam affirms that, right? Islam affirms that the general basis of all transactions, is permissibility. That all transactions are permissible until proven otherwise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ, Allah has permitted transactions. وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, and He has forbidden usury. So you can see that the second part is the exception. Right? The rule is established that Allah has permitted transactions. And that is the general basis. But there are certain things that are prohibited for various reasons. Most of those reasons going back to injustice. Injustice on that individual or injustice on the society as a whole. Tamam. Now, just really quickly, this is a little bit off topic. Some of the scholars, they like to break down in the books what are the 5 rulings with regards to something, right? So obligatory, recommended, permissible, disliked, or forbidden. So with regards to earning a living, they said it's obligatory to earn enough sustenance for oneself, one's dependents, and enough to cover one's debts. Right? So for oneself, meaning that you're at least able to, that obviously you're going to keep yourself alive. Right? That would be the first step. That would stop you from having to beg. And additionally, that you would be able to pray the salat standing. Right? If you have enough food that you can pray the salat standing, then that's the bare minimum. Because if you're so hungry that you have to sit down to pray because you can't stand, then you're taking away from your religious relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's recommended to go beyond that, such that a person has a bit of independence and they are not needy of others. Right? So that would be a recommended level. The Prophet ﷺ said that people are all dependents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the most beloved of them to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala are those who are most beneficial to His dependents, those who benefit others. So it's recommended to get to a level that we can not only take care of ourselves, but we can support the poor, we can support the needy, we can support the downtrodden in our communities. Permissible would be that which is beyond the recommended level, which is additional pleasures, additional comforts, some things that are just nice to have, a little bit of luxuries here and there. But then we get to the other side, where there's a type of discouragement involved. So the scholars, they mention it's prohibitively disliked to amass wealth for the reason of boasting and showing off or the like. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man talaba ad-dunya mufakhiran mukathiran laqiya Allah ta'ala wa huwa alayhi ghadban." Whoever seeks worldly possessions or wealth, right, for boasting and to just merely to amass wealth, then they will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while He is angry with them. Right, so the difference is not the amount of wealth, it's the intention here. So it doesn't say that it's disliked to amass more than the need. No, it's right. The amount is not the question at all. The intention is that question here. And then obviously prohibition would be right on that line as well. Tamam. Now, as for employment and work and earning a living, in the sacred law, that work in general is inherently permissible. Right? The basis is, again, permissibility, and most types of work in most developed countries are permissible. Right? So majority of the options out there for employment are in themselves are permissible, but there are some things to look out for. Right. Now, obviously, we can go into this in many details, the type of work, right, the amount of work, what exactly is one's role in the bigger scheme of the company, and so forth. But essentially, permissible work, or permissible means of living, is that which avoids that which is haram, right, according to the letter of the law. So if a person's job avoids the haram actions, then that job is permissible. But there's a difference between a permissible job and a praiseworthy job. A permissible work and a praiseworthy work. And we're always, with our circumstances and with our difficulties, we're always trying to raise that bar and get to a higher level. So permissible work means it just avoids the prohibited. Right? There's no prohibitive act in that job, then it's permissible. But praiseworthy work, right, is that which promotes the good, it benefits others, it avoids all prohibited elements, obviously, and it doesn't assist in any sin at all. It doesn't assist in any sin at all. Right? So one of the elements that we will talk about in this session is direct assistance in the haram and indirect assistance in the haram. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Do not assist each other in sin or in enmity. So a job that directly assists in the haram is haram itself, as we will see. So a job that promotes the good, whether that be a worldly good or a religious good. It doesn't have to only be a religious good. It could be helping people find housing. It could be anything in a worldly sense or in a religious sense. Now this is recommended. And throughout Islamic history, much of the spread of Islam was because of praiseworthy work. We think of the spread of Islam, the people on pulpits saying, everyone say La ilaha illallah, right? In this real kind of romantic ideal of da'wah. But most of the da'wah we may not even have heard of, right, throughout history, because it wasn't that epic. It was just really good character and business traders. And one of the greatest examples of this is the Nusantara area, the Sumatra, the Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, as well as some of South India as well. Many of the traders from Hadramaut, from South Yemen, would take the routes to Southeast Asia, and they would establish themselves there. And because of their beautiful character, and some of what we're going to talk about today, in comparison to what we find in the markets today, is almost miraculous. It's a break in the norm. People look at it and it's like, what are you doing? And we'll look at that, and this is still thriving in many Muslim countries. This beautiful prophetic character in business, and many people just became Muslim. Like, I want to be like you, right? I don't want to be like all these other people trying to cheat me and everything. I want to be whatever you have. I don't know what it is, but I want to know what you have. Right? And that was one of the greatest da'was of all time, and hundreds of thousands of people. And if you ask what is the most dense Muslim population country in the world, right? Indonesia, right? And where did that start? Business traders, right? With beautiful character, right? So these are the types of employment or jobs that really are the ideal that we hope for, but at the least we aim for that which is permissible. Tamam. So now we have to jump into the bulk of what we want to talk about. What are those actions that would fall out of the scope of permissibility? And in our time, it may be difficult to avoid these things. It takes a level of iman, right? Because there's a lot of opportunities to gain a lot of wealth very quickly if you take the wrong roads. Right, but we're not looking just for wealth in itself. We're looking for barakah. We're looking for sufficiency and to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And if we have Allah, we have everything. Right? And even if we have all of what people would think of as worldly accomplishments, but we don't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have nothing. Right? And just look at the statistics of the amount of millionaires and billionaires who have committed suicide in the past 10 years. It's ridiculous. Right? If that's not a lesson, right, for the world, I don't know what is. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you can Google it if you wish. Tamam. So the biggest kind of bugbear, the elephant in the room, right, is riba, usury. Right? And we mentioned the verse of the Quran just now, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ, that Allah has permitted all business transactions, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, and He has prohibited usury. Now the Quraysh, when they heard that, they said, إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَا, right? Transacting and riba, they're the same thing. Right? But Allah responds by saying Allah has permitted bay' transactions, but has prohibited riba. So they're not the same thing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you'll hear many things like this. like, oh, just take the 2% of interest and give it to the poor. It's the same thing. Right? I've literally heard the exact same words that the Quraysh said 1400 years ago in the Quran. So it sounds good, right? But in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are worlds apart. And what Allah permits and what Allah prohibits, right, can never be the same. لا يستوي الخبيث من الطيب. Allah says that which is foul and that which is good can never be equal. But there are types of riba. We're going to focus on the types that are most common amongst our society here. Linguistically, the word raba, yarbu, riba means to increase. Any type of increase is a type of riba. But that's not what we're talking about in a legal sense. But that linguistically, that's what the word means. Interestingly enough, the word zakat means the same thing. Zakat also means increase. And there's a verse of the Quran where they use the word riba linguistically, and it's not talking about this type of usury. But in regards to what we're talking about, the legal definition of riba is a stipulated increase without just basis in a contract of exchange. A stipulated increase without just basis in a contract of exchange. Now, a contract of exchange is much broader than buying and selling, because it would include a sale, it would include trade, it would include loans, it would include gifts exchanged with conditions. Conditioned gift giving would also be a contract of exchange. So a stipulated increase in that, right, and those things would be considered usury. Mufti Taqi Uthmani, one of the great contemporary scholars, especially in regards to finance, his definition is a stipulated material increase for one of the contracting parties in a contract of material exchange. So you can see he specifies certain things. Right, I'll read it again. A stipulated material increase for one of the contracting parties in a contract of material exchange. Right. And before we go into the types, people may argue, why is usury prohibited? And really, you can see most of these things that are coming are prohibited because they lead to dhulm, they lead to injustice, or they lead to argumentation. There's absolute economic injustice in riba, in usury. So the person with the capital, the lender, right, in a loan situation, always wins, and they have zero risk. So the principle in Islam, Islamic finance, is that no wealth can be earned without risk. Right? There has to be some khatar. There has to be a risk involved in earning money. Whether it be in an investment, whether it be a loan, right? There has to be some sort of risk involved. You can't make money without any risk. Just making money, compounded on money, and just sitting back and letting it flow in, while everyone else becomes poorer and poorer and poorer and more in debt. Right? So over time, the poor become poorer, the rich become richer, and you have this vast disparity between the rich and the poor. Whereas zakat actually minimizes that disparity and allows those who are in the lower levels of economic status to re-engage in the society. So it's actually better for the entire society that we don't have usury. It's better for everyone, because then we have more players in the game, we have more skills being offered, we have more products being sold, we have a better flow from top to bottom as well, whereas you have people who are in very desperate situations, and you have others just sitting on mountains of money that they can't use even if they wanted to in their life. Right, so the prohibition is based on the potential of economic disparity and injustice, not it's actually happening. So if there was a utopian situation where there was usury but no one was being wronged, it would still be haram, right? Because it has that potential in it. It could happen. So the prohibition is based on that potential, not on the actual result. And as for the types of usury, the usury that is directly spoken about in the Quran which is known as the riba of the Quran. is the usury of lending for an additional return. I will give you $1,000 and you pay me back next year 1,200. Right? That is the riba talked about directly in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said in the hadith, كُلُّ قَرْضٍ جَرَّ مَنْفَعَةً فَهُوَ riba. Any loan that brings about benefit is riba. Right now, we also have in our tradition that anything that is expected customarily is akin to being contractually stipulated. So if I give you, for instance, I'll loan you $100, and then now I'm expecting you to give me a ride to work every day. I'm expecting you to do me favors because now you're indebted to me in some ways. That's a type of riba. Right? So even if it's not contractually stipulated, if the actual loan itself is drawing in other benefits, then that is a type of riba as well. Obviously, if it's contractually stipulated, then it's completely haram. Even to the extent that Imam Abu Hanifa, if he borrowed money from someone, he wouldn't even sit in the shade of their house. Right? And this obviously is above and beyond where the law would stop, but this was his scrupulousness. He didn't want even to take a peripheral benefit from that person. Obviously, that's not, it's in itself prohibited. So I give $1,000, I give someone $1,000 for 1 month, and they give me back 1,100. Right? So the money acquired from that loan or earned from that investment, right, is owned by the person. Right? So if he does give me 1,100, that 100 does become my possession, but it's haram for me to have it. Right? Tamam. So the next one is the usury of exchange. This is called riba al-fadl. This is the usury of the hadith, where there are 6 things mentioned in the hadith. This is probably the least common amongst ours in our society, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned 6 things. He said gold, silver, dates, barley, wheat, and salt. Which is, for instance, I will give you 2 kilos of dates and you give me 3 kilos of dates in a month. Right? That's riba. Right? So some scholars said no, it only applies to these 6 things. Right? Other scholars said no, it applies to things that are akin to these 6 things as well. And so there is a difference of opinion in regards to that. If one is trading between these 2 things, if they're the same exact thing, gold for gold, silver for silver, so this is what happens when we have currency exchange, gold for gold, silver for silver, then it has to be the exact same amount and it has to be immediately transferred in the gathering. So I can trade you 6 pounds of gold for 6 pounds of gold immediately, that's fine. But if if they are the exact same thing, I'm not allowed to defer the payment. I'm not allowed to take more than what I'm giving. But gold for silver, on the other hand, right, is permissible to have a difference in value. So I can give you 100 grams of silver for 5 grams of gold. That's permissible. But the condition is it has to happen immediately. It has to happen immediately. So currency exchanges are permissible, for sure. So you can trade the dollar for gold. You can trade the dollar for a rial or for a rupee or whatever it is. But it has to happen right there in the gathering, in the majlis. As per the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The third type, and we're just going to go through the ones that are not that common a little quickly. The third type is the usury of a deferred payment. So, for example, I sell an item for $1,000. The buyer has 1 month to pay, or the price increases 5%. Now, this is very common, right? This, especially in real estate or buying anything of high value, that I will sell you my MacBook for $1,000. You can pay me in 5 months, but if you miss a payment, you owe me 5% more for every month, right? And then it compounds after that. And then, so that is a very common mode of usury as well. Right, so the second type, which is the one mentioned in hadith with the 6 things, and the third types, the deferred payment that we just mentioned, are considered bay' fasid, a corrupt contract. And we'll talk more about this in a second. So if a contract meets all of its conditions, but there's a sin involved, there's sinful actions involved, it's called a corrupt contract. If an action doesn't meet the conditions at all of a sound transaction, then it's called an invalid contract. So the difference between a corrupt contract and an invalid contract is that the corrupt contract, there's actual transferal of ownership between the item of sale and the money. So say I sell Brother Zaid, for instance, I sell him my MacBook with a condition of usury. He owes me 1,000 and then 5% if he's late. So that sale, actually, the transferal of ownership does occur. So he does own the MacBook now, and I do own that $1,000, even though there is a sinful element there. But it's obligatory on me and him to address that prohibited aspect of that contract and to either annul that condition or to reverse the contract and just break the contract itself. It's obligatory on me. But I do own that money, and he does own the MacBook. So if I were to gift that money to someone, it would be permissible for them to take it. If I were to use that money for something else, it would be permissible for that person to take that money. All right. As opposed to an invalid contract, right, where there is no actual transfer of ownership. Even if the things are trading hands, I don't own that money. So I'm not allowed to give it to anyone, and no one can take it from me. So for instance, an example is if I sold a pig, right? One of the conditions of a sound contract is that the item of sale has to be something that is considered of value, right? In Islam, pig is not considered value, right? As opposed to other types of things, right? So if I sold my pig Bessie for $1,000, right? Whoever bought it doesn't actually own Bessie, and I don't actually own the $1,000. I still own Bessie, which is it's already problematic, right? Even though it's in their barn, right? And he still owns that 1,000, even though it's in my pocket. So if I gift that 1,000 to someone, they're not allowed to take it if they know, right? If I buy something with that $1,000, that contract is not sound either if they know. Right? So that money is not mine. I'm using someone else's money, essentially. So that contract never even takes place. Right? So just keep these terms in mind, because when we go through them in a second, we'll see where this applies in modern-day circumstances. If you go to someone's house to eat, or you go to someone's, where are the lines at? And do we have to ask? So it opens a lot of... And inshallah, we're hoping to leave a sufficient amount of time for questions. But there are other things that are not usury, right? But they are akin to usury in regards to that they're sinful. They have the same legal ruling as usury, as being prohibitively, strictly prohibited, haram. And these things are quite common. So one of the types that is akin to usury is the corrupt contract that we just talked about, right? So all of the conditions of a sound transaction are there, but there's sinful elements in the contract, right? So if we want, we can just list out what are the conditions of a sound contract really quickly, and then we can see why this is different than the invalid transaction. So for a contract to be sound, there has to be an exchange of what's called mal. Now, mal is translated as wealth in English, but it's not just money, right? So even my cup here can be wealth, right? It's something of value. Something of value is considered mal. So I can buy your MacBook for 1,000 of these cups. That's permissible, right? Even though there's no actual money taking place. So it has to be something of value. That's the first condition. It has to be mal. The second is that mal has to be permissible in the sacred law. Okay? It has to be permissible in the sacred law. Right? If it's not considered mal at all, then there's no contract. Right? So But if it's considered mal, but it's not permissible, then it would be corrupt contract. You understand where we're going? So example, what is not considered mal in Islam is wine. Sorry, pork, what we just said, bessie, right? The pig. Right? Pig is not something of value. It's not considered mal at all in Islam. Now, things like wine, for instance. Wine is considered of something of value for other people, like, for instance, the Christians and for the Jews. Right? And even in the Islamic lands, they did not force the Christians and the Jews to stop transacting in wine. They just forced them to keep it to a private sector and not to allow it to spill over into the public Muslim areas. So it was considered a type of mal, even though it's prohibited. But for us, that transaction would be fasid, it would be corrupt. So it is a mal. It does fulfill that condition, but it's sinful. Okay, so if I sold a bottle of alcohol for $100, right? I do own that 100, right? And they do own that alcohol, but it's haram. It's haram, and then it's it's obligatory on me and him to either reverse the transaction or to get rid of the money, and so forth, which we'll see in a second. The second condition, so it's wealth, right? It's considered mal. It's something of value. The third is that it actually exists. Right? It's not something that will exist later and I'm trying to sell it right now. The only exception to that is if you're having something made. Like if I go to the tailor and I said, I will buy this thobe with this description and you make it for me for $30, it's permissible. That's the only exception. Unless we talk about salam, forward payments and stuff. But it has to exist. Right? I can't sell something that doesn't exist yet. Like for instance, when my goat gives babies, right, next season, then I'll sell you right now that baby. Like it doesn't exist. You can't sell what doesn't exist. It has to be owned by me. I have to own it. I can't sell someone else's property. Okay? And then the last one is it has to be transferable. It can't be something that I can't give you. Like I will sell you that bird flying in the sky right now. Like I can't get that. How can I get that? I don't own it either. Okay, so those are really, it's almost self-explanatory, some of them, right? So it has to be wealth, right? That is considered permissible. The permissible condition would make it corrupt, right? But if it's not wealth at all, then it would make it invalid. It has to exist. I have to own it, and I have to be able to deliver it. Tamam. So a corrupt contract. Right, is any contract that fulfills those conditions, but there's a sin involved. There's something prohibited in that contract. So as far as the legal ruling, it's the same legal ruling as usury. And it would be obligatory for both contracting parties to break the sale, right, or to remove whatever thing, that prohibited aspect that's in the sale. So, for instance, if I sold something, like for instance, I sold wine to someone, right, for $100, right, it would be obligatory for me to get rid of that $100, right, to give it back to the person, right. Or if I don't know the person, they're gone, this is years ago, then I would give that in charity with the intention to just get it out of my wealth. Right, and then obviously all these scenarios are going to pop up in your minds, and that's what the questions are for. If there's any private questions, we can, inshallah, announce a method of how to get those through, inshallah, because a lot of things are circumstantial, and I need to be able to ask questions as well. It's in order to answer them. Now, if there is other impermissible elements, like for instance, gross undescription of the item, like you don't know about the item, these things would also spoil the contract itself. So for instance, if I said, I'll sell you a car for $1,000, right? And you say, okay, right? And that's our contract. That's the extent of it, right? That would be sinful, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that do not consume each other's wealth in transactions illa an taradin, except for with mutual consent. mutual consent is the condition of the Quran for transactions. Anything that would preclude that mutual consent would be sinful in the contract. Whether it be gross undescription of the item, whether it be not mentioning what the price is, anything that would lead to argumentation would make that contract sinful to the extent of how bad it is. So for instance, I'll sell you my car. We were talking about cars yesterday, so all the examples of cars are coming out. Say, I'll sell you my Camry, right? And don't worry, I'll sell you my Camry, right? You're my friend, I'll sell it to you, right? I'll give it to you for a good price, right? Well, what's the price, right? And in his mind, the good price is $5,000. In your mind, you're thinking he's going to hook me up. My good price for me is $2,000. There's argument. That contract would be sinful from the beginning, right? So things like that need to be removed from the contract in order for the contract to be sound as well, right? So all of this would become akin to usury. The second thing that is akin to usury, which is unfortunately does occur, is guilting someone into giving something. Guilting someone into giving something. I've seen some fundraisers where they literally point at people and say, right, you're a lawyer, right? You make how much a year? Right? On stage, right? You make how much a year? And you're only giving $5,000? Right? Astaghfirullah. Everyone say astaghfirullah. Right? That money is haram. That money is haram. Even if he gives it, it is haram to use that money. And the principle is كُلُّ مَا أُخِذَ بِسَيْفِ الْحَيَاءِ فَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الرِّبَا. Anything that is taken with the sword of shame and guilting people, right, is the same as usury, is akin to usury. Right? And this does happen. It does happen. Right? People are kind of intimidated into buying something, or intimidated into giving money, or intimidating into loaning money. That money is haram to use. That money is haram. It's obligatory to give that money back, even if they gave it to them and gave it. So that is also akin to usury, and that applies to wealth or property. It applies to anything of value. The next thing is what's called gharar. Gharar, it's a hard word to say. Gharar is deceptive uncertainty. Right? So I will sell you, for instance, I will sell you my protection. Right? That if anything goes wrong with your house, right, I will take care of it. Right? So what actually are you buying? We don't even know, right? If something happens to your car, right? Don't worry, I'll clarify in a second. Everyone's like, oh my God, right? But it's a type, right? So if something happens to your car, right? You pay me $300 a month or whatever it is, right? And in the case that something does happen to your car, I got you. I'll take care of it. Right? That's gharar, right? That's deceptive uncertainty. There is no actual item of sale. The item of sale does not exist, right? It's a possibility that you're selling. So almost all conventional modes of insurance are haram. However, huge caveat. However, because if there is a necessity because of the place that one lives in, or there would be a gross potential harm on that person for not having that, then it is considered permissible according to the contemporary scholars for the sake of the need and for the sake of the necessity. And we have a principle in our tradition that al-darurat tubihu al-mahdhurat, that necessities permit certain things that are impermissible. Like for instance, if we're all going to starve and poor Bessie is the only food in the city, right, then we're allowed to eat Bessie. In fact, some scholars would say it's obligatory to eat Bessie. Right, that it's not allowed to let yourself die if you have that option, right? And it's mentioned in the Quran as well, right? So certain times there's necessities. So for instance, if someone lives in a place where they have no trouble whatsoever. They live on the top floor of their own store, and all of their family lives on the same block. They don't need anything, and they never travel because they're afraid of highways. Right? They don't need any car insurance at all, right? Then it would be better to leave it. It would be better to leave it. But if someone lives in rural Makanji, right? Where the closest store is 15 minutes away, right? On a good day, if you don't get caught by the train, right? Then it would be very difficult for them to live without that car. And civilly, right, it's illegal to drive without insurance, right? So that would be permissible. Similar, if a person has a gross, or someone has a medical condition, a severe medical condition, which would likely cause them to need medical attention consistently, such that that would be a financial burden on them if they didn't have insurance, then it would be permissible for them to have insurance. But things that are not permissible, things that would not be permissible are things that are beyond the need. There is no need in that. Right? Like for instance, life insurance. Life insurance, a person could save their own money. They can do, but there's no direct need, right, for that. Right? So I don't know any scholar that has kind of extended that permissibility to life insurance or to other types of insurance. But if the principle is, if there is a necessity that would cause you harm in not having that, then it would be permissible. In a more idealistic society, there is an alternative, because privatizing insurance is another one of those things that's just causing huge disparity, right, and huge injustice in the world. And if you look, you can Google the data, the greatest section of debts of American citizens is medical debt. It's medical debt. Whereas the Islamic alternative, which would be takaful, which everyone pulls their money together and then they, as need, they take from the money, right? That would be the better example, a better option. And there are options like that in America. The next one would be playing games of chance, right? Which is gambling. Playing games of chance, which is pretty much you are buying the possibility of something. That's another deception. Right? I'm putting my coin in this thing, right, with the chance that this ball is going to knock down a bunch of quarters. Right? That is haram. Right? It's haram because there is no sale there. There's no transaction. It's a deception. Right? And then obviously other gambling. I'm going to buy this little 4x4 card, right? With scratch off all the silver stuff, and with the chance that I may become a billionaire, right? That is haram, right? And that $1 billion would have to be given in charity. Right? Again, the exceptions would be like health insurance, car insurance, and so forth. Right? You can't drive without car insurance. So gross or deceptive uncertainty in the transaction would be akin to usury. The next one that's akin to usury is bribery, rishwa. In Arabic, rishwa. Now, rishwa has a very specific definition. Rishwa is إبطال حق أو إحقاق باطل بعوض. It is to vitiate a right guaranteed by the sacred law, or to secure a right not recognized by the sacred law in exchange for something, right? So, for instance, that if you can access this well, right, that's on public property, if you give me $50, right? That well is his right. It's public property. That water is public usage. Right? Me standing in front of it and intimidating him by saying, "Give me $50" is haram. Right, because that right already is due to him by the sacred law, right? And there's many examples of rishwa. I'm sure you all can think of it. Now, rishwa is considered ghasab. It's considered as if you're stealing their money. Now, if a person is in a situation where the only way that they can get access to something that they need is through rishwa, they're in a society, they land in some country and they need to cross the border, and the guy's like, right, if you don't give me $1,000, I'm keeping your passport and sending you back home. Right? It would be permissible to give it. It would be haram for them to take it. Right? So the sin only lies on that person. Tamam. And just moving on, we want to take the last time to talk about two things, inshallah. Contracts, business contracts, and what we mentioned before about assisting in sin. Tamam. So in business contracts, right, mutual material dealings are going to either be contracts or promises. Right? And it's very important to distinguish between the two. Like, I'll hook you up, that's a promise, that's not a contract. Right? A contract is legally binding in Islam. Right? And it must contain definition, right? Everything is explained, clarity, right? And specifically in the following elements: the expected work or the product or the service, the specific compensation, or if you call it the pay or the price, the time or the duration, right? Or the due dates that that item is going to be given. Right? Large indescription of any of these things is sinful. Right, so I'll hook you up. I'll get it to you soon. What's another example, right? Yeah, don't worry, I'll do a good job. Like, all of these things, right, that happen quite often, maybe not so much here, they're sinful. Right? Just the contract itself is sinful, just for not having clarity, regardless if it actually leads to argumentation or not. Now, any contract of value, it is sunnah to have it in writing. It is an emphasized sunnah to have it in writing, a contract of value, especially if it's something of great value. And this applies to loans as well, especially to loans. Right, so I'll just give you one classic example. Okay, you just moved into a house, right, and it's sunflower yellow because your house was built in the early 1920s here in Makanji. So it has all this old wallpaper and bright yellow colors, and you want to get it painted. So you hire a painter, and you say, I will give you $2,000 to paint this entire house in 4 days. Okay? Now, that right there is still not enough clarity, still not enough description. Because is the 4,000, how much did I say? 2,000. Is the $2,000... right, on the expectation that it's done in 4 days, or is the $2,000 on the expectation that the whole house gets painted? Because what happens is, okay, 4 days is done, they've only done 2/3 of the house. Where's my $2,000? Right? And you're saying, like, you didn't finish. He said, I finished the 4 days. Right? And you're saying, you didn't finish the house. He said, no, the money was for the 4 days. And I said, no, the money was for the house. Argument. Right? A perfect example of a good contract would be, I will pay you $2,000 to paint the entire house on the condition that it takes 4 days to do it. If it takes an additional day, for each additional day, I will charge an extra $500. Right? That is a good contract, right? Because now all of the possible scenarios that could happen are covered. Right? That is how we want to do our contracts. Over-explain. Even if the person's like, yeah, I got it. No, just keep going. Right? As they say, that live with people as if you love them. Right? They're your beloved friends, right? But deal with them in business as if they're strangers. Right? And this is, it has a longer lasting protection to your relationships with people, especially if you're dealing with close people and relatives. These things happen all the times. Right? Your cousin, you've known him all your life. I got you. Don't worry. You don't have to go. What do you think I'm going to wrong you? Or all these things come up. Tamam. Now, assisting in sin. We mentioned the verse. Allah says, "Do not assist each other in sin." Do not assist each other in sin. There are some aspects of work or jobs or services that may be and have a link to sin, right? If that link is just kind of peripheral, or it's secondary, or it's not, or it's indirect, right? Then the job is permissible. If it is directly linked to that sin, then it is haram. So, example, can I take a job at a bar? No, it's not a trick question. No, it's haram, right? Because I am directly giving people alcohol to drink, right? Can I work at a grocery store that sells alcohol? Right? But am I selling alcohol? I'm just the cashier. That's my job. I just go, doot, doot, and one of those things that is a bottle of alcohol. So that's indirect. That's indirect, right? If someone comes to you, if you're in that situation and someone comes to you and says, hey, do you know where the alcohol section is? And you're like, oh, go ask Marty. I'm new here, or whatever, right? Oh, can you recommend me which bottle? Yeah, Coca-Cola. It's over there. That's the right. So we want to avert ourselves from any direct link to that haram. But if it comes on your counter, right, then you are not accountable. Now it's not ideal, right? According to the letter of law, that money that you earn from that is halal, right? But it would be disliked if you have other options that you're not taking. Right? If you have other reasonable options that you could do that don't include even indirect assistance, right, then it would be problematic. It would be necessary for you to take those other options if they're reasonable options. A direct assistance, if a person is in a job that has direct assistance into the haram, they do need to leave that job. But they don't have to leave it now. They don't have to, after the class, call their boss, I quit. And now they're in financial disarray, everyone that needs them. So they can take the time to find a substitute, but they would need to remove that from their life. And inshallah, Allah will give them extra barakah in their life for leaving those things. Tamam. And how are we on time? 3 minutes. We're good. Alhamdulillah. Other examples of assistance in haram. There was a great scholar. I'm just going to leave out the details on purpose. They are by profession a najjar, a contractor. Right? They build buildings, and there was a period of time where they were absolutely their family was almost in famine. Like there was no wealth. They had no money to pay any of the bills. And they were not able to make ends meet. For some reason, because of the economy, no one was taking his services, and he had no other means of income. And then a church calls him and says, "We want to build a new church." Right? Is that direct assistance in the haram, or is that indirect assistance in haram? You're just building a building. Right? They're going to use it for the church. Right, that would be permissible, right? So, and especially in that circumstance, it would definitely be permissible because of the necessity. Same thing with you're a grape deliverer, right? You deliver grapes between farmers and companies, right? But obviously, if a person can avoid delivering grapes directly to someone who's going to use it to make wine, then that would be better. Last thing I want to talk about is employees and contracts, right? And we're hoping that in the questions more specific things can be discussed, inshallah, and also in the interactive session. That's the plan. Employment is of two types, right? There is the ajir khas, the exclusive employee, right? The person you are hiring most of the time on a salary. Now this person is hired long term, right, and for the specific needs of the employer, right? Now, say they are hired 40 hours a week, right? Now, one of the most important conditions is that if you are a najir khas, if you're an exclusive employer, you are required to act in the best interest of your employer. Same thing as if you are an agent on someone's behalf. You are required to act in the best interest of that, the muwakkil, the one who gave you that agency. So if, for instance, if I work for one company as an exclusive employee, I'm not allowed to work for their competitor without permission. I can't double dip. Right? If I'm an agent, I'm not allowed to kind of position myself in a way that I get all the best interest and everyone else is. Like if I'm a real estate agent, I'm on the side of the seller and the buyer, and I'm trying to get them both to jack up the price so that I can make more money. Right? That's haram, because I'm obliged to act in the best interest of that employer. Tamam. Now, it is not obligatory that a person who is hired for 40 hours a week, that they work all 40 hours of the week. They're just like typing away or laying brick after brick with no breaks or anything. In fact, if the employer has nothing for them to do, they can kick their feet up and sit back, and they still deserve the money, right? So pretty much what the employer is buying or getting from the employee is that they are freed up to do whatever tasks that are within their very clear and explained, overly explained job description, hint, right, for that amount of time. That they are freed up to do that. That if there was something to do, that they would be able to do it. Do they actually, right? And if there are things to do, that they do it, that they would do it. Now, there is a level of that the custom plays in the sacred law. Al-urf al-muhakkam, the custom is legally binding in itself. So, is it customary? Is it customary that a person takes a break once in a while? Is it customary to go? I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee, right, and come back. Right? Yes. Right. How long would that be? 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm not talking about lunch break. I'm talking like you already took lunch, you're working now, and you just want to go to the bathroom, or you want to just grab a coffee real quick. Customarily, that's fine. It's fine. Now, is it customary that you leave the office for 3 hours, right, and you're in Starbucks, right, cutting it up with your friends? Right? That's not customary allowed, right? So whatever is customary allowed is permissible. Right, and in that customary time, right, you're allowed to pray, right, and you're supposed. Right, if it's time to pray, then you would pray in that time. Again, while quickly doing the prayer and doing the sunnahs without unnecessarily delaying above the customary amount of time that you come back 3 hours later, right, having read Surah Baqarah, right, you're full of iman, but now you're, right. Employer is angry. The other type of employee is the contracted employee, where you are hiring them for a very specific task, and that's it. Once that task is done, there is no more employment that remains. So this will be your painters, your contractors, your services, essentially. And again, gross description, right, of what the job descriptions are, the roles, the amount of money, the time period, the exact extent of the job, the nature of the job, possible circumstances that may come up, right, and so forth. And I'll just read this last part, quoting directly from Imam Ghazali in this chapter of the Ihya, where he says that if a transaction fulfills the conditions of the letter of the law, essentially, just the bare minimum validity, the mufti or the scholar will say that the transaction is valid. The transaction is valid. However, it does not mean that it doesn't contain sinful elements. So valid does not mean completely good. Valid does not mean good necessarily. So it could be valid according to the letter of the law, right, but haram. Right? How would that be? Right? That if there are wrongful actions that cause injustice, that cause unfairness, that cause other people to be harmed, either at a societal level or at a personal level, that you are harming that person. So, and he gives, I'll just mention a few examples that he gives. He says that it is societal harm to do what's called ihtikar. Ihtikar is essentially hoarding, right? So, okay. There is people, right, the barley prices or the wheat prices, right, are pretty low right now because for whatever reason, I'm going to hoard, right, all of the wheat in this whole city until everyone is starving, and then the prices skyrocket, and then I'm going to sell it, right? According to the letter of the law, the business contract would be valid. Right? There's an item, it's a wealth, it's valued, right? And so forth, but it would be absolutely haram. And the Prophet said, whoever hoards food for 40 days, then gives it all in charity. They don't sell it, they give it all in charity. The charity is not enough to expiate for that sin. And there's details, obviously. It applies to something that is an essential need for people. Right? If you hoarded all the MacBooks, right, no one's going to die. Right? We might go crazy. But especially food, right? Bottled water, right? In a place where there's little or no water, right? Medical supplies, or things that are of essential need, it's haram to hoard them, right? And it's haram to overprice them as well, to do that. As for something that would affect an individual directly, right? Then that would be for one to be unfair in their contract. So the goal is that we love for others what we love for ourselves. Right? And he mentions 4 things that are part and parcel of that ihsan. So there's adl, there's just mere fairness, letter of the law. You're not doing anything beyond what you're required to do in the contract. That's fine. That's a level. Allah, in the law, ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Allah commands for justice and excellence. Right? So we hold ourselves to justice, but we aim for excellence. So justice would be that one does not praise an item of sale in any way that's untrue. Like, yeah, this car is the greatest, right? Or in Arabic, right? Nadif, right? Literally means clean. Right? But they're lying. They're overpraising it. So it's not really that good. It's not really that nice. Now, if a person unnecessarily praises it, but they stick to the truth, that's considered vain speech. That's considered disliked. It's not necessarily sinful, but it's considered blameworthy. It's undignified, right? Like, this cup, it's really white. It's unnecessary. And you get that a lot, but it's not in itself sinful, as long as one is not lying. Now, if there is a need to kind of praise your item because the buyer would not know if you didn't say that, then that's fine. Right? It's not obvious that it's white. Right? If I said, well, it's made of porcelain from the hills of Nepal, like, okay, they didn't know that. Right? No one would know that. Right? Then that's fine. Right? And the worst case scenario would be for someone to take an oath by Allah and still lie in their description. I swear by Allah that this is the newest brand. I swear by Allah that this is real, right, Air Jordans and not knockoffs. Right? The Prophet said that a false oath may sell the item, but it will destroy the barakah. You might actually, someone will buy it, they trust you. The second thing is not to conceal any flaws in the item of sale. And the people, the righteous of the past, they would go out of their way to tell you every single defect in that item. So one of the beautiful stories is the story of Jarir, radiallahu anhu, the Sahabi. Whenever he would sell an item, he would say, it has this flaw, and this flaw, and this flaw, and turn it over. Look, see that little scratch? And it has this flaw, it has this flaw, and this flaw. And someone would come to him and be like, no one's going to buy it from you if you do that, right? Again, the change of paradigm from our society to the prophetic example. And he would tell people, he's like, you want it? Take it. If you don't want it, don't take it. Right? And he would do that for all of his transactions. And the people would come to him like, why are you doing that? You're never going to sell anything. He said, we pledged an oath to the Prophet ﷺ that we would be well-wishing for every Muslim, that we would want the best for them in every situation, that we would want for them what we want for ourselves. Imam Abu Hanifa was a trader. He would sell cloth. So he had a long roll of very valuable silk. And it had one defect. In that 100 dhira, arm's length, it had one defect. And he left his employee behind, and he told them, anyone who wants to buy this, you tell them about that defect. And a rich woman came, and she bought the entire roll. And Abu Hanifa said, okay, did you tell her about the defect? He said, no. Right? I forgot. Right? She bought the whole roll. I didn't expect that. I forgot to tell her. And he said, give all the money in charity. Right? Give all the money in charity. Right? And this is the level that these people, the people who understand their relationship with Allah, right, that they took. The last two, do not conceal its measure or its weight or certain details that are necessary, and do not conceal the price. Actual ihsan, the above and beyond, would be to fulfill all commitments, to deal graciously with people, to overlook their shortcomings. If they have buyer's remorse, that you give them a refund. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever gives a refund to someone who has remorse, then Allah will build them a house in paradise. Final story. I'm getting some bolded letter messages over here. One of the companions had a house and a business right next to Masjid Nabawi, right next door to the masjid, and he was doing very good business. And he was praying all 5 prayers behind the Prophet ﷺ. Dunya and akhirah. He's got everything. And all of a sudden, he closes his shop and he sells it. And people are like, what are you doing? You had the best of both worlds. He said that the only reason I built that house is because business is because I heard the Prophet said that whoever gives a refund to someone who is remorseful for a sale, Allah will build them a house in paradise. Today someone came back and said, I didn't really want that. Would you mind giving me a refund even though you don't have to? And he said, you can have the refund. He closed up the shop. I got what I wanted. And he sold the business. MashaAllah, these are the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah bless us and allow us to follow them in the best of ways. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We'll open the floor to how much time we have for questions? 10 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. Maybe take one from each side, and then interactive session we'll do with all of them. So write down your questions if you have them. You can send them in. Oh, I have the questions, right? Okay, the first question is, I don't have any question. Yeah. Islam, are children considered as rizq that comes from Allah? Most definitely. Most definitely. And they would use yarzuquni a walad, right? Allah provided me a son, right? Gave me the rizq of a walad. Most definitely. Is asking for rides to and from the masjid from others going there a part of blameworthy asking? No, not at all. Not at all. The blameworthy asking would be a type of persisting begging, like desperation involved in the way that one is asking, or asking even though one doesn't need it. Right? That's where the lines of the prohibition would start. Is asking for a loan to hasten a necessary home improvement project a part of blameworthy asking that leads to 70 types of faqr? No. Right? So there's nothing wrong necessarily with asking, or even asking for a loan. The prohibition of begging is of begging. Right? Begging is not asking. Right? Begging is asking in a demanding way, in a very desperate type of wording or mannerisms. The other type of prohibited asking would be to ask people for money just to amass wealth. Right? You got $1,000 at the house, and you're like, yo, can I get $5? And you go to the next guy, can I get $5? And the next side, and you're just building up cash piles at home. Right? From asking, that would be prohibited. Because that's takathur, it's just seeking to amass wealth. But generally, just asking, right? Can you give me a ride? Can I borrow $100? Is not in itself, as long as it's dignified. How does earning and a living apply to women? Should women strive to earn a living for the sake of Allah, even if they're not obligated to? Yes, that is a really very good question, and we have a beautiful example in Sayyidah Khadija radhiallahu anha, who is a great example of a woman who is an entrepreneur, a great businesswoman. Now, I think, and this is possibly a personal opinion, I do know other scholars who would say the same thing, that it is important that women save their money or have some sort of income that they have as a backup, because especially if they're away from their family, if they're away from other maharim, other relatives that would take care of them in a bad situation. So if the husband passes away, or if there's a divorce, la samahallah, right, then they have something to fall back on. Right? To that extent, I would definitely encourage. Anything beyond that would be permissible if they wanted to take that endeavor. Again, aiming for praiseworthy work. Right? If they can turn it into something that's beneficial for the community, beneficial for the ummah, then that would be even better. Just tell me one. Or do I have your timer? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is a good question. Why is it not permitted to distribute any interest collected on savings to poor and needy? Okay, so one thing is acquiring interest is prohibited. Right? It is sinful. It is something that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes, that it is displeasing, it is damaging to one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? If someone did fall into that, then it would be necessary for them to donate that money in a way that would benefit the Muslims, not with the intention of getting a good deed, but the intention of just getting rid of that wealth out of their possession. So if it did happen, right, then it is not a choice about giving it away or not to the poor and the needy. It is, we have to do that, right? Obviously in a way that would not cause us even more harm in doing so, maybe gradually. But to take it intentionally with that in order to give it away is problematic in itself, because if we don't have to fall into that issue, then we don't want to. But if we already fell into that issue, if we already fell into it, then the money would go for sure to them. There are some scholars that give a little bit more details on this. Maybe we can talk about that in the interactive session. Tamam. So we have a record of these questions, right? Okay, tamam. So, tamam. So we'll try to use this during the interactive session to cover the rest of these. Some good questions about loans. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارك الله فيكم جزاكم الله خير السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته